Okay, intermittent fasting. There's different type, lots of different types. Like, just walk us through. Like, there's fasting mimicking, 5-5-2. Like, let's walk through. Can you explain the different types?
Which would you like?
Really, think about fasting. There's actually infinite variability. Sure. So it can be any time that you don't eat, that's fasting. It's really the flip side, the B side of eating.
Are we fasting right now?
Exactly. It really is that simple. So you can do anything, and then you can add stuff back, and they're just variants of the fasting. So in terms of timing, you could do 12 hours, for example. You could do 16 hours. You could do 20 hours. You could do 24 hours. You could do 5 days, 7 days, 30 days. So it can go to whatever time you want. Then you can start doing variations of fasting. So you can do bulletproof coffee, for example, which is fasting, but you are allowed to have MCT oil and so on. You can do bone broth, you can do coffee, you can do water fast, you can do dry fast, so where you don't even drink water. So all of those are just variations, and there's no really right or wrong answer. It's really, you really want to focus on what it is you're trying to get out of it, and if you are getting great results and you're doing fat fasting, or if you're doing bone broth with fasting, hey, go ahead. But the point is that you want to know what you're trying to get out of it. If you're trying to lower blood sugars, if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to reverse your type 2 diabetes, keep an eye on that.
So what if I want to feel great, perform at a high level, feel longevity? Like, what different types of fasting should I explore?
Well, I think you have to understand that our ancestors didn't crawl out of their cave and say, what's for breakfast? There wasn't any breakfast. There wasn't a refrigerator. There actually wasn't any storage system. So we had to find breakfast, and breakfast means break fast. And so if we didn't find breakfast until lunch, that's when we broke our fast. But oftentimes we didn't find breakfast till dinner. And one of the things that makes humans unique among most animals is we have the ability to store fat. We're called the fat ape for a good reason. And no other ape stores fat like we do. And so we've been able to use that fat during times of when we couldn't find food, which was quite often. And like the previous panel said, we could actually burn our mitochondria with fat and do great things. And in fact, one of the things that people worry about in fasting, we're taught that we should eat, right, get a smoothie and a sort of protein shake before exercise. In fact, that's absolutely, positively wrong. When an animal is stressed without food, as Jason so nicely shows in his book and in my book, The Plant Paradox, you actually improve athletic performance. Because if you don't find something to eat, then you're not going to be here and pass on your genes. So we have an actual mechanism with fasting to improve performance.
It's not just that, but also for illness. If you think about it, when you get sick, the first thing you do is stop eating. And there's a lot of good reasons why. So some people actually say it's the fasting instinct. And all animals do this. Dogs do it, humans do it. Because what happens is that you get a surge of this counter-regulatory hormone, including growth hormone. Noradrenaline supports the blood pressure. You lock down a lot of the glucose, which is great for bugs. So if you're septic, for example, if you're septic, for example, if you have a bad infection, then you're going to lower your blood glucose, which is great. So all of these mechanisms are deeply and intrinsically human. It's not something which is just some passing fad. It's like the 5,000-year-old fad. That's the whole problem.
Right.
And so what are some of the emerging health benefits?
So, again, it's not a new thing. As a surgeon, we fast every single patient before we do surgery. So for us, it's not as big a deal to talk about it. For patients who have type 2 diabetes or any sort of insulin resistance, different types of fasting can be helpful in reversing those. And you had mentioned the fasting mimicking diet. Right. That's a way, so, I've personally done 5 cycles now.
Can you explain what that is for people?
So what the fasting mimicking diet is, a lot of it comes out of Walter Longo's lab, and they're looking at you can do water fasting, but some of the benefits of fasting are the result of low protein intake and low carbohydrate intake. but still having fats that you can burn as fuel. So what they found is that if you provide some small amounts of fats, people feel like they're eating something. And using some different techniques, you can actually increase the transition from going from a sugar burning state to a fat burning state. And our bodies actually do that really well, and it can take a few days, or you can do some hacks to sort of speed it up. And so by doing a fasting mimicking protocol, you can, what the studies have shown is that during that time, you get this thing called cell autophagy, which is where the cells basically, to sort of oversimplify it, but the cells clean out what's not functioning properly. And you can get some where cells that aren't functioning well actually die off. And then during the refeed is when you see this release of stem cells and the body sort of regenerates itself. And so the emerging research that's coming out is exciting and interesting with how does that impact longevity, how does it help reverse diseases, and things like that.
Let's talk about longevity, brain health, cancer. What is the science showing?
Well, I think that the science there is very exciting because autophagy is very topical because the 2016 Nobel Prize for Medicine was awarded to one of the early researchers. So everybody thinks that the cellular breakdown, so the cellular and subcellular parts get broken down, so everybody says, wow, that's really bad during fasting, but it's not. Think about when you renovate your kitchen or something. The first thing you do is tear down all the old cabinets. You can't build on a new cabinet on top of an old one. It doesn't work. What you need to do is tear down all that old junky protein, the stuff that's kind of, not working properly, and then rebuild it. And that's exactly what fasting does. So as you fast, you break down the proteins, all of those kind of the stuff that doesn't work very well you get rid of. Then the growth hormone goes up, and as you do the refeed, you rebuild it. So it's a whole regeneration cycle. So instead of having old 70s style bathtub, you have nice new modern
so
stuff.
is fasting, is part of the secret, is it cutting caloric intake, or is it the length between meals?
It's really
Yes.
probably both.
It's both?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that when you talk about cancer, for example, so one of the things that's emerging is that there's all these nutrient sensors in our body. So if you think about it, our body has to sense when there's nutrients so that you can grow. So for example, one of the very old, ancient as in a lot of old organisms, is insulin. When you eat, insulin goes up. So you're telling your body that nutrients are available. There's another one called mTOR, which tells our body that protein is available. So as your body senses that there's nutrients, it grows. When it senses that there's no nutrients available, it will shut down all those growth pathways, which is very powerful because the cancer cells are growing too much, polycystic ovaries are growing too much, polycystic kidneys are growing too much. There's all this junk in your brain that gets deposited, the plaques and tangles of Alzheimer's disease. Perhaps you could break all those down. And that's fascinating research coming out from places like Mark Mattson's lab and so on that show that memory improves with caloric restriction, intermittent fasting. And so perhaps, and this is very kind of preliminary, perhaps you could prevent cancers. Perhaps you can prevent Alzheimer's disease. And then, of course, the obvious benefits of metabolic syndrome, obesity, type 2 diabetes. It's like, wow, that is like everything that we deal with as physicians. That is like 90% of what we deal with.
Just from intermittent fasting.
Yeah, let me give an
Yeah.
example of how you can actually apply intermittent fasting on a daily basis. A good friend of mine is Dr. Dale Bredesen, who just released The End of Alzheimer's. And he and I both agree that the brain needs a period of time to have increased blood flow during sleep. And it's actually early during sleep when you have deep sleep. And the brain literally washes itself of all this accumulated debris. And the brain needs huge amounts of blood flow above its basal rate to do this. Now, if you eat before you go to bed, what happens is, believe it or not, digestion is incredibly energy expensive. And we divert all of our blood flow down to our gut. Those of us who are old enough, our mothers wouldn't let us go in the water for an hour after eating because we'd die of cramps. And they were actually, the wives' tale was actually correct because we did divert huge amounts of blood flow. So what Dr. Bredesen has discovered is you need a window of 4 hours between your last meal and going to bed so that, in fact, you'll have enough blood flow to go to your brain. And what he's shown is that if you want to keep your brain healthy going forward, you should have a minimum of a 12 to 14-hour window every day where you don't eat. And preferably, if you carry the ApoE4 gene, which is the quote Alzheimer's gene, you really should have a window of 16 hours every day when you don't eat. Now, in practical sense, what that means is you finish your last meal at 6 o'clock at night, and you don't eat again until 10 o'clock in the morning. And you can shift those time periods, 7 o'clock, 11 o'clock, however you want to do your life. But the evidence now is the brain absolutely has to have this period of increased blood flow to keep it clean, and intermittent fasting is a great way to accomplish this.
One thing I wanted to add, when we talk about any intervention in healthcare, there's sort of, I look at everything as this is a tool, but you know, as an orthopedic surgeon, I can turn almost anything into a hammer, but a hammer is not always the right tool for the job. And so intermittent fasting can be incredibly powerful, but like any drug, it has a lot of the pathway changes that Jason and Stephen have talked about. And one of the things that can happen and one of the dangers people can get into, particularly if they're type 2 diabetic or have a lot of insulin resistance, is when the body's in a fasting state, it increases glucagon and it actually decreases insulin production. So C-peptide, which is a marker of your body's production of insulin, goes down. And what studies have shown is that if you fast, so if you skip breakfast and then you eat a moderate to high carbohydrate lunch and even a moderate to high carbohydrate dinner, the body takes a while to shift back. So what they're seeing are greater glucose excursions, so meaning that it's going higher with people who have skipped breakfast. So when we talk, I don't eat breakfast hardly ever, and in fact when I operate the entire day without eating any food, and then I eat when I go home afterwards, and I'm just fine. Like I feel like my brain actually functions better. But when we have people, and having been someone who was obese myself, I can tell you that there are times when I would try and do these things, and then I was literally like with the chocolate bar as the spoon in the peanut butter, trying to get as many calories in as possible afterwards. So when people are doing this on their own, there's the risk of sort of binging and having this high glycemic meal afterwards. And it's actually metabolically worse in that circumstance. So there are times when we have to be a little bit cautious with it.
Well, you mentioned binging, and that brings up, emotional eating. When does this become unsafe or an eating disorder and gets out of control? Like, who should fast, who shouldn't fast? Like, how do you do it in a way that's safe?
So for
You have a great point in your book. Why don't you do that?
Yeah, I think that it's really all about the context. So there are certain people who shouldn't fast. And these have been pointed out by many religions over the years, like pregnant women. You shouldn't fast. It's not a good idea. Breastfeeding women, no, not a good idea, because these are time-limited situations, and you can do it afterwards. But you can do real damage if you are deficient in certain nutrients, say folic acid deficiency. That can cause a lot of problems. So it's not a good idea. If you're growing, if you're a child, extended fasting is not a bad idea. 12 hours, should be the regular, because that's, just breaking a daily fast. But yeah, you shouldn't do it. And you really have to choose where you're using it. If you have an 18-year-old girl who's 90 pounds and probably anorexic, no, not a good idea. But if you're a 70-year-old man who weighs 300 pounds, probably a good idea. So you have to use a little bit of common sense, but there are actually very few situations, other than those that we talked about, that where you can't fast. You can almost always do it. And it always brings up the question of anorexia nervosa, which is a lot of very important. It's it kills people, and it's a really important problem. But just because you fast doesn't mean that you will develop anorexia. It's a psychological disease of body image. It's not the process. It's like saying, wow, you shouldn't wash your hands because you're going to get obsessive compulsive disorder. It doesn't work that way. It's not fun. It's kind of hard.
So Carrie, what's your take on it? You mentioned you were obese, you've lost a lot of weight, turned your health around. Like, how you see fasting and when it's right and how to do it in a healthy way?
So I think it can be really helpful. I think the problem is some people go into it again on their own. I think it's great that people are able to partner with physicians and coaches and people who can guide them through it. I think the issue becomes when people do it and they start their day off, they're like, I am not going to eat today. And then by 11:30, you're starting to get a little hungry, and by 12, all of a sudden, it's,
Right.
the refrigerator's open. And these repeated pathways of that, to me, that's a bigger marker for we have other metabolic things that we have to help fix, and sometimes some psychological stuff, but I would argue that psychological binge eating is more often related to, it's a much bigger picture as far as, the nutrient content and what the body needs to be fed, and that it's a statement related to that. So those are the people, if you're going to, I think what you eat at the end of a fast is really important, and I don't think we
So you
spend...
don't fast and have like a bag of candy.
Yeah,
Like,
you don't fast and then
have
go
it.
through the McDonald's
Right.
drive-through. Are we allowed to say McDonald's?
You can say whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, that's
We'd
where
like to
it's...
thank our sponsors.
Yeah. For sure. And that's where it's, really problematic. And I think, too, how people do fast, like the word fasting gets a lot of different uses. I did 42 days of juice at one point, and I'm friends with Joe Cross and the whole group there just to see what would happen metabolically. And I think that that's good for some people. I think the issue is some people, in that particular case, have juices that are too high in sugar, and then what you do after is important. Right. And getting guidance with that for your individual physiology, because it does look a little different.
So what is the future of intermittent fasting?
Well, I use it extensively in my patients, particularly with autoimmune diseases. And one of the fascinating papers from long ago that actually the vegan community likes to point to is they took 20 women with rheumatoid arthritis, and they put them on a 20-day water fast. And every one of them, all the markers of rheumatoid arthritis went away. Now, after that, they put them on a vegan diet. And 50% of them, the rheumatoid arthritis returned. 50% of them, it stayed away. Now, the vegan community says this proves that a vegan diet cures rheumatoid arthritis. It does not say that at all. What it does prove is that a 20-day water fast will make all the markers of rheumatoid arthritis go away. And what's happened is, during that fast, you completely change your microbiome in your gut, and you completely allow your gut to heal. The tight junctions that were talked about earlier completely heal during that time. And that's where autoimmune diseases come from, and that's what I stress in my practice.
I mean, I think the future is really now, because we're facing in medicine this huge obesity, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome disorder, and maybe it doesn't apply to some of the people here, but it's taken brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, like we're talking cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and here we have a tool that is available to everybody in the world for free, that has been used for 5,000 years, and that you can start tomorrow, which means that using only the tool of knowledge, we can cure all these diseases. And that's an incredible thing. I mean, you're talking about we. Of course, we have been using this for a long time, we as humanity. And somehow, through a lot of advertising, like, oh, you gotta eat the minute you get up and don't even think about skipping a single meal, you're gonna die. You're not gonna die. You might do really good. And that's the whole point. It's incredible.
We'd like to thank our sponsor.
But the power we have with knowledge is just unimaginable, because it has the power to give us back our lives. And maybe not us, but maybe our fathers and mothers, and that's just as important.
Well, amen to that. Thank you so much, guys. Carrie, you're going to stay.